The views and opinions expressed in this recording do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Logan City Council. Logan City Council does not make any representation of the accuracy of any such views and opinions.
So, welcome everybody. I'm sure you can all hear me. Yes, hi. So, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time out to come and visit our library. Most of you are probably sitting on pamphlets or you've got the brochures in front of you. But our local libraries are a wealth of knowledge from local people and businesses. So I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter at the library because there's some awesome events throughout the year. Now, first up, am I allowed to take a beautiful photograph of you all? There's no one that needs to contact their agents or anything? No? So can I have a big cheesy smile? Not too cheesy, but I'm getting a bit of flashing here. So let's have a wave. Let's just do a crazy wave. Not that crazy, please, but awesome. Okay, so I'm a little bit husky. I'm in between Barry White and Michael Jackson with my voice. I had a wonderful 2.5-week trip to Ohio in August, or July and August, and coming home, my family love it because I've got no voice, but it's coming back now. But I lost my voice on the aircon coming back. So, as you can hear, I've got an unusual accent. It is from Daisy Hill. But I actually am from London originally, and my family moved to Hampshire on the south coast. And my lovely hubby and I, and our son, when he was only 11, not my husband, but my son, emigrated. And he's now 25, and he's a teacher. So we love Australia, we love Daisy Hill, we love Logan, and it's a wonderful place and a great place of opportunities. So my journey has been a sweet journey, and I started cake decorating probably when I was about 9. When I was 7, my mum had my first brother. When I was 9, she had another. And it's like, what's going on? And both my brothers are 3 days apart, birthday-wise. And one of my brothers is born on my dad's birthday, July the 5th. So 2 birthdays, July the 5th, 1 July the 8th. So when I got to be 10, I made the very first joint birthday cake for all 3 of them. And in them days, I scrubbed my mum's roasting tray out, which had all these sediments of meat from the week before, but we won't go there because that's how she made her good gravy. And I scrubbed it, and I asked her about baking paper. She said, I don't know what you're talking about. So I used the butter wrappers, which were the paper, to line the tin. I went to my library, because as a child, I loved my library, because I was limited to how many books I could have a year. But at the library, there were so many. And I bought this beautiful Ladybird cookery book. And it's an antique now. I want to give it to my grandchildren, if we have, if my son has any. And I read a recipe for a Madeira cake. So I gave my mum the shopping list. We went to the shops, got all the ingredients. We made the recipe. We put it in the tin, and it filled about 1/5 of the tin. So clearly that recipe wasn't enough, so we had to quadruple it. And we baked this cake, and it was the most awesome Madeira, which is kind of a nice vanilla-y cake, but it was an awesome cake. And then we realised we had no display board to put it on. So my mum upturned her afternoon tray tea, covered it with aluminium foil, and we used that. And I made buttercream, and I made like a treasure island. I made blue coconut, I made like a little river, I made a little pirate ship out of marzipan, and I was like, woo! And when all my family from London came down to visit us, their eyes lit up, and I kind of realised, wow, what an awesome thing to do. And it kind of gave me, woohoo, I can do this. So my love for food began there, and every year that cake got better and better, and the recipes were quadrupled to make it. And in the end, my mum treated me to a proper tin, So we moved, and I kind of thought I'd be a home economics teacher because I love food. And I met a wonderful guy called Neil, and he said, Jackie, I'm going to go to college. And back in the 80s, my career choices was a hairdresser, secretary, teacher, and it was a real narrow area to filter into. And he said, I'm going to train as a chef. I'm like, whoa, I'd love to do that. So I had to ask permission in them days to my parents to say, guys, would you mind if I went to college? My dad wasn't overly excited, but I baked him a few cakes and convinced him. And so I signed up for college. And college was an amazing place. I discovered fish. I thought fish was fish fingers, you know, with breadcrumbs. I discovered food that I'd never seen before. Because we weren't Mum was a wonderful cook, don't get me wrong, but there was a certain set recipes that she would create. So college was amazing, absolutely amazing. And I realised, wow, what a wealth of food is out there. And I realised how easy it was to ruin it, but also how to cook it. So college life was amazing, and I trained as a chef for 2 years, and I did an extra year to do patisserie, and college life was wonderful. So then I travelled around the world. I got my very first job at the Sheraton Hotel in Munich, and I was a patisserie chef. And back in the 80s, I touched with royal icing. I made beautiful cakes with royal icing, layers of marzipan, and just lots of decoration. So sometimes I get older or mature women that come up to me and go, in my day, well, that's my day as well. That was my day. My day was fruitcakes, marzipan, and raw icing. And we're going to talk about fondant and how it's revolutionised our cakes. So my journey has been a beautiful, sweet journey, and I then started to be that go-to pastry chef that would make the cake for a member of staff or an event. And I really, really loved cakes. You can tell by my beautiful figure. So when I met my hubby, he's got a huge family. I've got a big family, but his brags more. So all the nephews and family members, I got to start to make their cakes. And what was wonderful, fondant came about in the mid-80s, early 90s. Now, fondant we call sugar paste. And if you watch a lot of the American programs, they talk about fondant this, fondant that. And if you watch like Cake Boss or Ace of Cakes, and if you don't have Foxtel, you can go onto YouTube and Google all these programs and you can watch them, you know. But they all talk about fondant. And fondant is a wonderful product that we can put on our cookies and our cupcakes and our cakes as well. And it revolutionized cake decorating because it then gave the opportunity for people that didn't have huge skills, didn't know about raw icing, could then create beautiful cakes like this, you know. And the awareness of fondant kind of started to really go through the roof through our magazines and our publications. So back in the UK, I worked for a really high-end catering company, and I got the very first opportunity to do a gig for Woman's Own. And I did some cakes and some tarts, and they came back to say they were too good. Could I rough them up a bit? So I kind of like, they wanted them more homely, you know. So I got my blowtorch and just browned the pastry round the edges, okay. So I got a gig for that, and then I got an advert gig for Renee heartburn indigestion tablets. I think we have them here in Australia. And my hubby at the back, he said, since meeting me, he's always had heartburn. But it's to do with my food. It's, you know, it is love, but it is my food. So I did a heartburn advert for that, and I made a massive crock and bush, all the little profiteroles, and going down on the M25 to the it was a nightmare. I was like having palpitations, but it came together. And in the advert, it's there for 2 seconds, but it doesn't matter. It was 2 seconds that it was there. So, and then I met a wonderful lady, Gina, and Gina owns a company called Blue Soup Company, and she kind of subcontracts for a company called Untitled, and they're a film production. So my first gig was a cake and some food for Bridget Jones' Diary. This is the second one, and we got a information sheet to say, Bridget's mum is not a great cook. Can you do some frustrated styling food? So basically what we did little miniature Yorkshire puddings with sausages, and everything was a bit eclectic. It was a bit strange, you know. And so I did that, and I did 2 christening cakes. Now, the christening cakes didn't actually get into the actual film. All the food did when they're sitting in their conservatory. And then I did the food for Wimbledon. So Wimbledon is all about Kirsten Dunst, Paul Bettany, but I call it Bettini. And it's all about Wimbledon circuits. Has anybody seen that film? Yeah. It kind of came in and then went out quickly. The Americans love it. Anything to do with British stuff, they'll keep it for weeks. But here in Australia, we only have it for like 2 weeks and then it's back out again, you know. So I did the food for that. And then I did the food for Finding Neverland. So in that, Johnny Depp, in the deleted scenes of the video, Johnny has a beautiful dinner party with all the kids. And he was really frustrated because they were too stiff in their acting. Because they were kids, but actors. So he took a whoopee cushion in to get naughty noises happening, and he started throwing my sprouts and carrots to break the atmosphere. But in Finding Neverland, I did all the food and props for that. There's another film called Iris, and Kate Winslet has eaten my lobster, and she's still living, so that's all I'm concerned about. And often people say, is it real food? It is real food. We have to do several serves. We have to heat it up. We have to chill it if it's cold, because we can't kill them, you know, we'll be in trouble. So my journey has kind of always been into foods. And then my hubby and I and our son came here on holiday when he was 7, and we fell in love with Australia. And 4 years later, we emigrated. Everyone says, was it a big thing to do? No, it was quite easy. The downside is the family only come out for 7 weeks to visit us, okay? So that's the downside. But we love Australia. So coming from England to here, I had to start again because no one knew what I'd done, and it really didn't matter because at the end of the day, it's my journey and not theirs. But I had to start again. So I chefed for 3 years, and then I used to do all the wedding cakes for Mount Cotton Rainforest. And so my business began again. And then my hubby gave me a kick up the butt or a slight push and said, Jackie, do your cakes. We'll build a studio, which we have. We've got a beautiful studio in our gardens in Daisy Hill. It's all licensed. It's all council approved. And I run courses on how to become licensed as well for mums and dads that want to do this full time as well. So I teach. I come to the library. And what I love now, I've been doing it for about 9 years, little 5-year-olds now are in my teenage workshops, you know. And I love to see that progression, you know, of cake decorating. So, I love what I do. I published my first book 5 years ago, which is Contemporary Cakes Design Book 1, which is over there. You can't leave unless you purchase one. And second book is going to be out next week. So this leads me on to our Queensland Cake Expo. Next weekend, we have a wonderful 3-day show at Logan Entertainment Centre. It's put on by the QLD. And you can go onto their website because we have paid classes, we have free demonstrations, and we have paid demonstrations. I'm going to be there with my stand, and I'll have a copy of my book because it's not ready yet. It's coming next week. So this is an amazing opportunity to get in front of amazing local and interstate talented people that can share their sweetness with you. And if you want to learn how to make flowers, we've got unicorn punk toppers, we've got groomsmen cakes, we've got a huge array of classes. And I encourage you to take this flyer home and go on the website and check it out. Now, what's a sweetener is for this weekend only, I sound like a salesperson, we have a 20% discount off all classes and paid demonstrations. You go to the website and you put it into your shopping cart, you just type the word in cake. There's information on the website. So all our classes this weekend, for 1 weekend only, are 20% off. So if you want to come along to a class, I encourage you to come. There's so much happening at the show, so if you don't want to do a class, that's fine. There's demonstrations throughout the day. You'll get to see me more and see all my crazy cakes, but there's some great stands as well selling their products. So I encourage you to support this local show here at Logan Entertainment Centre, and it's free parking. Woo-hoo. So, let's talk about cakes. So, briefly, up until the mid-80s, even early 90s, everything was a fruit cake or a buttercream cake. So the beautiful Americans love all their frosting and their buttercreams. And kind of most of us did our fruit cake. We would do a layer of marzipan, and then we'd make a layer of raw icing, let it set, put another layer down, let it set, and sometimes, I hope there's no environmental health officers, and I am getting recorded, we'd use fine sandpaper and rub it down to smooth over. But obviously we wouldn't do that now. And in fact, I don't do it now because I use fondant. But we do 3 beautiful smooth coatings and then pipe. Now, the downside of fruit cakes, there's a plus and a downside. Fruit cakes are delicious. My husband is my #1 fan for fruit cakes. And I try and convert the whole of Queensland to fruit cakes. I do classes on it. But the good side is you can make it in advance and it will last a long time. The more you make it in advance, the better it will flavour and taste. But the downside is it's laborious in decorating. It takes several days, if not weeks, to decorate. So when fondant came about, it kind of revolutionised cake decorating. So the Americans mainly call it fondant. We start to call it fondant now. But originally it was called sugar paste or plastic icing. Now some people have rang me up in the past and said, "Can I eat plastic icing?" I go, yeah, it's not actually plastic. It just looks like plastic. It's so smooth. Am I bouncing a bit on this microphone or not? No. So, I have a bellowing voice. So, the smoothness, this is styrofoam, we're not going to eat it. The smoothness is it's like plastic. It's really smooth, I always say smooth as a baby's bottom. So, with our fondant, we can make our own, and in both of my books, there's a recipe to make it. However, and my mum will be shaking her head in heaven now, my recipe is not as good as the manufacturing one, because the manufacturing one has preservatives and extras. That's not necessarily a good thing, but for longevity, it is. So you can make your own fondant. You can make your own fondant, but the downside is it's quite sticky. It's quite hard to use. Now, there are different brands of fondant that you can use. The brand that I use is a local company brand, and they're called Bakel's, and it's called Patina Ice or Petin Ice. They're actually based in Underwood, but you need a wholesale ABN to go and purchase from them. And you can buy it in wholesale 7-kilo tubs, or you can buy it in the smaller packets, and it comes pre-coloured. Now, if you buy it in the tubs, you can buy it from some cake decorating shops as well. And if you have a local IGA, which I do, and Drake's, you can buy this in the bakery section for around about $7.99. In the cake stores, it's $18. So where do we want to buy it? IGA and Drake's. Okay, so let's talk about fondant and the do's and the don'ts. Are there any teenagers here in the room? If so, I do apologise with what I'm about to say. Now, I always say fondant is like a teenager. My son used to tell me off, but he can't tell me off now because he's 25. Fondant is like a teenager. It doesn't want to be overhandled. The more you overhandle it, the less they'll like you, okay? So when we have fondant, if we buy it in white form, and when we buy our fondant, we can buy it in the big tubs in white or ivory. So if I'm doing a beautiful wedding cake and the bride is having an ivory gown, then I want to match that ivory to the gown. Because if I make a brilliant white cake, and hopefully it will be brilliant as well, but if I make a brilliant white cake and she's got a beautiful ivory gown next to that photo, her gown will look grubby compared to that. And trust me, that $5,000 dress is not grubby, it's beautiful. But if I put it next to a startling bright white cake, it won't look best. So I always ask the bride to give me a swatch or a screenshot of her gown so I can match it. So when we buy our fondant, we can buy it pre-coloured. The downside of the pre-coloured is it really tastes quite bitter because there's a product, and we'll talk about colours in a minute, called tetrazine, and it's a really strong flavour, colour, and it's quite off-putting, it's quite strong. If you use a very, very strong colour, your teeth, your tongue, everything will change that colour, you know. So don't be scoffing it as you're decorating your cakes. So when I colour up my fondant, many people make the mistake of using liquid colours, you know, like the cochineal, and you can get the little rainbow set of colours. They're lovely, not for cake decorating. They are okay for putting in a little bit of buttercream, but really what we need to use is a product called a paste gel colour. Now, when you buy these, you can buy these in Spotlight, you can buy these in Big W, you can buy them at most of your local cake decorating shops. You'll be able to buy these at the show next weekend. So, when you buy them, they normally have a pretty picture of the colour, and this will last you a long, long time because a little goes a long way. The other brand that I use, and this brand's called Wilton, and there's also Chef Master, but they're tiny little, and they're really concentrated colours. They're really thick, intense colours. You can also purchase another brand called AmeriColor. It's a paste gel, but it's a dropper, and you can just squeeze it. Now, this little bottle is about $6. This little bottle is about $14. This bottle will outlive you, okay? So before you get excited and go, oh, I'm going to buy the biggest bottle, it'll outlive you. It'll be out of date before you know it. So sometimes it's good to buy things that are bigger, but sometimes it's not. Now, when we handle fondant, it needs to be sealed in airtight bags. Glad wrap alone is not enough, so cling film is a no-no. You're going to need to have shares in Ziploc bags, okay? I'm a major shareholder in Ziploc bags, you know. So you need to make everything airtight because if you leave it exposed, it'll be like cheese and it'll go crusty on the edge. And if you try and knead it in, it'll be a nightmare. You might say naughty words as you're trying to knead it, you know. So with our fondant, ideally, we should colour it the day before and allow it to rest. Every time I have a frantic mum that's on the phone and she's saying, Jackie, I'm covering up this red, it's terrible, and I'm trying to cover the cake and it's disastrous. And I always say, when did you colour the fondant? Oh, just some 10 minutes ago. I go, that's why. Because it's like me, if I can have 8 hours rest, I can be dynamic the next day. But if I don't have that 8 hours rest, I'm like, I'm a teenager. I'm like, yeah, you know. So when we colour up fondant, ideally we should colour it the night before. What that also does, it stops the air popping, because when we knead our fondant, we're basically kneading. We're like making bread. We're trapping that colour in and we're kneading. So ideally, when we colour our fondant, we'll get lots and lots of air bubbles. So we should do that the night before. So if you ever rolled out your fondant and you've got loads and loads of air bubbles, it's because realistically you should have kneaded it and coloured it the day before, okay? When I buy it in the tubs, it's really huge, it's really big, whereas obviously, you know, the packets are quite small. The other thing is with the packets, when you buy them, ideally store them flat, because what happens is if you store them upright in the shops, when you go to cut that, you'll find that that edge is all crispy and hard. And it's because the air has still just got around it, okay? And then once you've opened the packet, you've got to put it in a Ziploc bag. So when I cut my fondant, when I take it out the tubs, it's huge. So I use a bench cutter or a pastry cutter. You can get these in most cookware shops. You can go to Robin's Kitchens in the Hyperdome. I think Kmart sell them. And what's wonderful, it's a really safe tool to cut the fondant without chopping your fingers off, you know. So, and I also use this when I make my cookies. I use it when I cut out my cookie dough, and I leave my cookie cutter on my dough, and I slide this underneath, and then I put it onto my baking tray and remove it. There's a few tips in the books as well. But, so with the fondant, I have kneaded this up. But the easiest thing is just to push down, give it a wiggle, and look how easy it is to cut. Because generally you'll get a big cook's knife and you'll try and cut it, and a couple of times I've trimmed that little finger, you know. And Logan Hospital is a beautiful hospital, but the coffee is really bad, you know. Not that I know. So, fondant. So, overall, you need to work somewhere cool. And I don't know if you know, it's a little bit warm in here, but our beautiful aircon's not working. Now, we need to work in cool conditions. So if you're hot and clammy and really sticky, your fondant will be exactly the same. So you need to think about when you're going to decorate your cakes or your cookies or your cupcakes and when it's a good time. Some of my students go, I do not have any aircon in my home. I go, well, be nice to your mum or your sister or your friend and go make the cake there. Because realistically, you need to work in a cool environment. Because if it's hot and sticky and very humid, your fondant will be exactly the same, okay? Has anybody had disasters with humidity and heat? Let's see those hands. Yes, yeah. So what I have in my studio, when we built our studio, we've got shares in styrofoam with foil. So when the heat comes in, it reflects out. And I treated myself, this is the excitement of my life, but I treated myself to a dehumidifier machine from Harvey Norman, $400, it plugs in. I don't have it running all year round, but it takes the humidity out of my room. And then with the water, it's a win-win scenario. I love gardening, so I go and water all my plants that are in the pots outside because it collects the water. Now, I don't have it running all year round, okay? But if you've got a really, really hot room and you're serious about your cakes and you want to make those cakes, then a dehumidifier is a wonderful thing to have running. But they are $400 and you've got to pay for the electric, obviously. But we have solar. So let's talk about colouring our fondant. So when we use our fondant to colour it, ideally, when should we colour it? The day before. So when we colour it, I want to just talk about boards. And some people ask what sort of boards you can use. So I like these. When I do my classes, when I do my demos in the library, they're just a placemat and they're kind of non-stick. You can use a flexi chopping board as well. And I think they're really good. Some people use the craft mats that are the self-healing, but you need to make sure they're the food-safe ones. And some of the ones that are coming in from China and stuff are not. So the first thing is when we buy our fondant, if I pull it apart, it's quite sponge-like. I'm going to walk around. Can you see when I pull it? It's kind of like a sponge. I always think it looks like coral. So like it's quite sponge-like. It's good. I've got a cordless microphone. I'm going to go and get a coffee. So it's like a sponge. Can you see when I pull it? It's not smooth and silky. It's... Ooh, she's doing very well. So it's like a sponge. Can you see? So what we need to do, we need to condition it. Okay? So it's like a sponge. Can you see when I pull it apart? Looks like coral. There's no one called coral here, is there? No? So it's like a sponge. Okay? So can you see it's not super duper smooth? It's like coral. It's like a sponge. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, we need to knead it. Now, I must make an apology. In my first book, there is a typing error. And it says in the book that when I knead, I always like to stand and I like to put all 54 kilos of my weight on the fondant. There is an error. It should be, excuse me, it's 56, okay? So I just want to get it out there, okay? Now, when I tell everyone to knead, I always say don't stand at your bench like a sergeant major. Get those hips a little bit loose, but not too loose. But get your hips slightly loose when you knead, because if you stand too straight, you'll start to have lower back pains and upper shoulder pains. And all my lovely cake friends go, oh, I went to the chiro and got my back clamped. So all my beautiful new students, I go, guys, don't stand like this when you're kneading. Get a little bit relaxed, get your hips a little bit hip apart. This is a bit of chefy training here. And then what you want to do, you don't want to have any gaps between you and your bench. You want to get right up. Now, my beautiful tummy is right up there anyway. So what I've got here, I've got a beautiful Korean board. It's not marble. And some people use marble to knead their fondant on. That's no good because marble keeps very cold. And marble will create moisture and coldness in your fondant. Marble is a beautiful, beautiful product, but it's beautiful for only chocolate work, okay? So if you want to do some chocolate work, you put your marble in your freezer, and then you can make all your chocolate curls and do whatever you fancy. But do not use a marble board. And sometimes I'll go into a shop and then they've got marble offcuts. I'm thinking, babes, you don't need those. So this is Corian. My lovely hubby used to make kitchens and stuff, and these were just offcuts of Corian. But what's wonderful, I don't need to put any fat or anything on here to stop it. So when I knead, I literally fold my fondant down. I like to put all 57 kilos. And what I like to do is I like to knead. And as you knead, what I do is I use the flat of my hand. I've elevated this up a little bit, but you probably all can't still see. And as I knead it up, what it does, it brings it all together, and it's beautiful and smooth. So prior to colouring your fondant, you've got to get it to that stage. And some people don't. They take it out the packet and start to roll it. But you've got to condition it. You've got to warm it up, okay? Now, what I like to do is I use toothpicks, or you can use a dropper. The choice is up to you. You can use a dropper, but don't get this one. It will outlive you. Get the medium-sized one, and that will probably last a good 4 or 5 years. But what I do is I get my colour, and I dip my toothpick, and I hold it, and I wipe all the colour into the centre, okay? I try not to get it all the way around the edge, otherwise I'll have it everywhere. And then what I do is I seal it up like a beautiful Cornish pasty or a samosa. So in England we love our Cornish pasties, and that's kind of a Cornish pasty. But by doing that, that seals all the colour up and it stops it spreading everywhere, okay? And then what I do is I just do a light knead. And because it's such a small piece, I'm just using one hand to warm it. I always take all my jewellery off. I always wash my hands. My rings are on my apron. Downside of that is if I forget and they go in the washing machine, they'll be washed, you know. Now, if I just knead it a couple of times, can you see that some of the colour is starting to come through, but it's not completely full on? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to knead it a little bit more. And can you see it's kind of streaky? When I roll out my fondant, I use 3mm acrylic spacers. Now, my lovely hubby, he makes them for me. He gets big sheets of acrylic and he cuts them down. I use them either side on my workbench. And that way I get a beautiful, uniform coating of fondant. Can I pass that cookie round? Now, do not eat this. This is about 6 months old, okay? Have a look and see how nice and uniform that is. Now, with my fondant, I'm going to place it on my bench and I'm going to roll it north to south just a couple of times. Can you see? Now, in my book, Guys, Cover Your Ears, this is a woman thing, but I call them love handles, those little fat bits. So, with our love handles, and you may go, I do not have love handles, and perhaps some of us guys have love handles as well, but basically, as I roll my fondant out, I stop at the top and I stop at the bottom, and it has that little extra thick bit there, can you see? And what that does, that helps me keep my shape of fondant as I roll. So when I roll out my big pieces, because often when we roll out and we want a round shape, it goes like the map of Africa. It's kind of all over. Yes? Is that a yes? Yeah. So by me creating those love handles either side, can you see that it helps me maintain my shape when I'm rolling it, okay? And so now what I want to do with my spacers, I'm going to roll my rolling pin. Now you can buy rolling pins with the rubbers on the circles on them, but the downside is when you start rolling out big pieces, you get track marks. So they're no good. They are recording this. So as I roll, and what you want to do, you want to roll in a continuous thing, because otherwise you'll get stop marks, you'll get track marks. But because of the acrylic spacers, it simply rolls. And so now, can you see I've got a beautiful marbly effect? Because can you see it's quite swirly? So if you wanted a marbly effect, that is how you can do it. Sometimes you might go, oh no, I like that better, you know? And what's lovely about marbling, if you want to, you can go a little bit crazy. And I use a pizza wheel. And if I wanted to, can you see it's not overly marbly on that section there? So what I've done is I've trimmed a little bit of the fondant, and I'm going to lay that in the middle. And I'm going to do a Spice Girls song. I'm not really, but two become one. You're going to go, who are the Spice Girls? So can you see? I can blend it. I can do all sorts with marbling. So if I wanted to, I could just snip that off, and again, just work that through. So can you see? You can add more to your marbling. But what I want to do, I want to keep going. So once you've coloured up your fondant, ideally you should allow it to rest the day before. So when you're making figurines, decorations, whatever it may be, ideally colour it and allow it to rest. Because this kneading, using all 57 kilos, can create air bubbles. Now, what I do next is I roll it into a little fat sausage, and then I just simply pop it into my bag. And then I roll the bag up to take all that air out, and I zip it up. Okay. I normally wait until Woolies or Big W or Coles have got all their decor tubs half price, and I'm that crazy woman with the empty trolley filled up. Yes, there's a few around. Because who wants to pay $18 when you can get them for $6 or whatever, you know? So I'm that crazy woman. And so when I retire, I'm going to sell so many things. It's just going to be crazy. So the next thing is I want to, any questions about fondant? Any questions on that? Anyone got problems with fondant? So when realistically, I always say around about 9 months. When we buy our packets now, it'll have a use-by date on them. Originally, our fondant tubs didn't have a use-by date, but I normally say about 9 months. Many years ago, I had a lady call up, and she asked for some advice. She was covering some Christmas cakes. Nowadays, I just say, do a screenshot or do a quick video and send it to me, and I normally look and try and help them. So she was covering all these cakes, and she had a terrible problem with them. The icing was just crumbling and falling apart. And I said to her, do you use corn flour? Because I don't. And she said no. And I couldn't understand really what was wrong. She said, they're just crumbly. The icing won't come together. And in the end, I said, well, how old is the icing? She'd had it for 4 years. And it was a bit, yeah. You can't keep it that long. Clearly, you can't keep it long. Now, occasionally, our fondant has a slight vinegary smell, okay? And sometimes it does smell slightly vinegary. But it's not off. That's just the acid. There's not citric acid, but there's a couple of things in it. So don't be offended if it smells slightly vinegary. And often people go, oh, I don't like fondant. I love fondant. I love this vanilla fondant because it's kind of, I say it's a vanilla. It's a very neutral flavour. It's lovely. And I think what the problem was many years ago, people used to put it on that thick, you know, because often the cake wasn't wonderful underneath, or it was, but the buttercream was a problem. And I rarely use buttercream. I use chocolate ganache as a foundation. I use 3 parts Calabo chocolate to cream, and I make a beautiful foundation for the fondant to sit on. But fondant, ideally, I would say keeps around about 6 months, you know. You must store it airtight. You must store it away from sunlight because it will fade. And so although these tubs are brilliant, if you leave them out by the window, you can come back the next day and everything will be lighter. So you can also freeze fondant if you want to, but the downside of freezing it, it becomes very, very wet when you want to use it. So, but if you've got a lot of fondant, you can freeze it, but you do not need to refrigerate it. So with anything that's frozen, it absorbs crystals. So, you know, that's why a loaf of bread after 2 months in the freezer tastes horrible, because it absorbs all those crystals. And it's the same with your fondant, you know. The other thing I was going to say is you don't want to leave it next to a heat source, and often we might have a spare cupboard next to the oven. Don't have your fondant in there because it's not too hot, okay? So next thing I want to talk about is beautiful tylose powder. Now, no licking my beautiful Ray, okay? Did that cookie come back? Or who's eating it? Bring it back. So all these beautiful designs in this book too, and as in book 1, we've got all these beautiful little figurines, okay? So in order to make our beautiful little figurines, Earlier, one lady asked me about marzipan, and do I use marzipan? Do I use marzipan to, and then this one, I'm going to start at the top. I'm trying to get down to my 53 kilos. Have a feel. No licking, okay? So, when we make figurines, one lady earlier said, do I use marzipan? And years ago, I used to use marzipan all the time. I used to make marzipan fruits. I used to dip them in chocolate. As a pastry chef, we used to make them as petit fours. I used to live and breathe marzipan. For every 10 I'd made, I'd eat a couple as well. But the downside of marzipan is it's very susceptible to our moisture because of the nut content in it. So I don't model with marzipan. I only model with fondant. Now, if I try and make a piece of seaweed or a bit of coral, if I just make it out of ordinary fondant and cross my fingers, it's still never going to dry, okay? Now, in winter time, if you're good and cross all fingers and say a few Hail Marys, it might dry, but realistically, it's not going to dry. So the hidden ingredient is a product called tylose powder. The tylose powder is a man-made product. It's used in candies and hard sweets. It's a thickener, it's an extender, it's a preservative. Some people call it CNC. So, tylose powder. When I discovered tylose powder, there's a terrible joke coming up, and I do warn you. When I discovered about tylose powder, I got so excited. I read the label, and it said, when added, will firm up. So for the first 6 months, every time I had a shower, I rubbed it all over my body. But it didn't work. So, tylose powder, how do we use it? Where can we buy it? And what does it do? So, tylose powder, we can buy it in most cake decorating shops. You'll buy it in a packet. Get yourself a container with some large writing. I have shares in masking tape. And write the word tylose on it so you know what it is. And it almost looks like, I'm going to pass it round. I'm going to give you less. I kind of think it looks a little bit like a white pepper. So have a look. So, tylose powder. When added to fondant, it will firm everything up. So if I rolled out a piece of yellow fondant and tried to dry it, it would never dry. But this has got tylose in. So all our candies and our hard sweets that we buy in the shops have it added. If you've got sweets and they've started to warm up and they all go sticky, they haven't got it. But good quality hard-boiled candy sweets normally have tylose or CNC added to it. So it's an edible product. When added to fondant, it creates strength and it creates structure. And it stops everything heading south. It will hold itself and support it. If I want to do a number for a cake, I can cut out my number with added tylose powder to the fondant and it will firm everything up, okay? So, how does it work? So basically, for every golf ball size of fondant, and obviously I don't play golf, but so I kind of just round up my ball slightly, and I would say that's a very, very big gumball. But what I do is I just flatten it slightly, and I add a very generous pinch of powder to the fondant. Now I have 10 minutes of work before it becomes too firm. So what I do is I work it between my fingertips, because what I don't want to do is really knead it on the bench. And as I work it between the fingertips, I don't know if they're going to zoom in on this. If there's actually, we haven't got that there, have we? No. A generous pinch. So can you see it's starting to go flaky? And what it does, it goes like puff pastry. It starts to make everything layer. Can you see? It reacts. It's like bark, not as in the dog bark, but as in the tree bark. It layers. Can you see? So as we add it, and what it's doing, it's reacting with the glucose. They don't like each other, but we want to knit them together. Okay? So, and what they don't always tell you in the cake shops is you can buy the little bottles of glue, but you can make glue from the tylose powder and mix water together, and then you've got your own glue. Can you see it just layers it all? So if anybody's made puff pastry, I'm a puff pastry freak. If I have a spare 4 hours, I'll make some puff pastry, but can you see it just layers? If it doesn't layer, you have not put enough in. Okay, so it layers. Can you see it? It's all little layers. You can, yeah. And if you had a really, really hot day, you could add more, but eventually it will go like concrete, you know? So then as I start to work it, and like here we've got a cute little elephant, and I've made the plaque already, passing them round. There's great responsibility. So what I do is I work it between my fingertips now. And the reason why I use my fingertips and not my hands, what's the difference in the temperature of my fingertips to my hands? Big difference. In England, if it's cold, if I want to warm my hands up, I go like this. I don't go like this because my fingertips are actually always the coldest point, you know? So what I do is I use my fingertips, can you see, to work it through. And then I knead it up. And then if I wanted to, I could cut out a circle. I could make a little plaque that the Ellie's sitting on. And my secret is upholstery foam. So you can buy this in Spotlight. You can buy this in Clark Rubber. You want to get good quality foam, not with lots of fibres on. Because the last thing you want to do is put a product on the foam and it's got all bits of fibre. You charge extra. They're recording me. We're going to have to edit. So the upholstery foam, you can buy it in big squares and you can just cut them up. But what's wonderful, when you make a product and you want it to dry, and I don't know where he is, there he is, I can leave my plaque, I can leave my teddy bear to dry, and the air goes under, and I get a dry bottom really quick. Doesn't take ages to dry. So can you see the value in your foam? This is a good thing to have. So now, if I wanted to, I could put my spacers out, and I could just roll north to south, again having that little love handle at the top, back and forward. And if I release that fondant from there, now I've got it to a beautiful 3 mils. I want to just show you something, and some people go, well, I don't understand what the spacers are really doing. Often when you roll out fondant, you stop and start, you stop and start, you stop and start. I'm exaggerating, but it's completely bumpy. So if you stop and start like that, and what you must do is do a continuous roll, and often that's a hard motion to do. That's a hard thing. So that's why the acrylic spacers are awesome, because the rolling pin will simply just glide along. Now, if I wanted to, and I haven't bought my cutters, but I'm going to improvise, I'm going to use a circle cutter, I can push down, give it a wiggle, push down, give it a wiggle. And then what I always do is I always remove my surplus away first. I don't try and get that circle out. I clear the air, clear the way, and do it like that. A valuable tool is an angled palette knife or a cranked palette knife. And it's not a flat knife, it's an angled knife. And then using my knife, I can simply slide that along. And because I've used plastic, I've not got such a clean cut. And generally, when I make the plaques, can you see the little discs that's inside the Ellie? And I just leave that on there. And then within about 4 hours, that's beautiful and firm. So is that a aha moment? Aha? Was that an aha? Yeah. So we're not talking about the band aha. It's like aha. So if I wanted to make a little figurine, and I'm not really, but if I wanted to, and I wanted to shape a little body, make a little Minnie Mouse or whatever, I can shape everything, give it a flat bottom, and then I can leave it on there to start to dry. Because the reality is, it's all these little tips. You think, oh, that's why when I made that figurine, it wouldn't hold its shape, it wouldn't support itself. So the other tip I want to share with my little figurines that I make is when I make my figurines, I never ever put toothpicks inside to support the heads. I use lollipop sticks, and you can just get these everywhere, and I cut them down with some strong scissors, and I use a lollipop stick to hold it inside. Because there would be nothing worse than making a real cutesy little figurine with a toothpick and then you tell your good friend, oh, you can eat it, and the kid takes it off and bites it, you know. Sometimes I use dried spaghetti, uncooked, but dried spaghetti, and I put a couple inside. So when you support your figurines, you should definitely support it on there. So I want to run through a few little tools. I have some acupuncture pins. So if anybody's got any sore points, just come and see me later. But they're not really. So they're acupuncture pins, and what I've done is I've taken some masking tape off, and I've made like a little mini flag, because I have beautiful stainless steel benches at home, and if I drop this on the bench, I can't find it. So then I'll have to charge extra. So you might go, why do you want to use an acupuncture pin? And why not a pin? And why do you want to use a pin? Because often we have air bubbles in our fondant and we have to pop them. If we do not, they are really checking out that elephant. They're taking photos, looking at it. Don't look at the dust too much. So when we make our fondant, when we roll it out, occasionally we'll have air bubbles. If we don't pop those air bubbles will grow. And they'll grow like a blister. So that's why it's really important to colour up your fondant the day before, let it rest, so that when you cover your cake the next day, you won't have so many problems. You won't be saying those naughty words in your head, you know. Because at the end of the day, if you have air bubbles, what will happen is that air bubble will rise inside that fondant. And if you do it at night time and then go to bed, and the next morning, you'll have a huge blister that's raised. And sometimes you can have huge air bubbles where the air is trapped in the cake and in the fondant, and it grows. It's got no way of going. So that's why it's really important to try and cover your cakes in the daylight. And you're going, yeah, well, if I work and I'm a mum, I'm going to be doing it at 10 o'clock. But the downside is that's when we get tired and we don't see those marks. We don't see those, you know. But if you have a mark, you just put a beautiful little flower on it, you know. And it's interesting. Every time I have a beautiful wedding cake, if I have a novelty cake, and I do novelty cakes. I don't know if you've been on my website and checked out who I am and what I do. But all those beautiful novelty cakes, they're not perfect. And they have to have all these decorations. And then the wedding cakes is like, oh, there's a mark there. It's like, there's something, you know. But there are fixes. So going back to our pins, an ordinary upholstery pin is about 5 times thicker than an acupuncture pin. An acupuncture pin is really, really fine. So if you want to pop an air bubble, it leaves no marks behind. And that is why we use acupuncture pins. Sometimes I use bright plasters to put on them, but I want to identify where that acupuncture pin is. Realistically, it will last in sharpness for about 6 months. You don't need to, you know, if you come to a class, you get a goodie bag and you get an acupuncture pin, because I've got a box of 600 and they'll last me. And what I've got is a big pin cushion to put them in, okay? Occasionally you might have flex, so let's talk about clothing quickly. If you wear dark aprons, and they're very trendy at the minute, black aprons, I don't like them. They produce fibres everywhere. Can you hear me? Yeah. Ooh. So if you wear a black apron, often those apron fibres will go everywhere. And if you're covering a beautiful white cake, guess what? You'll have all these little flecks coming in. Have you dropped it? Oh my gosh. It had a short but sweet life. Sorry, they're having to get a vet out now because the elephant's had an injury. Lucky I've got about 20 more at home. But yeah, with the air bubbles, smooth it out. Yeah. So for me, if I'm rolling out the fondant and the air, I don't want to see the elephant. Just take it away. So if I have air bubbles when I'm rolling out my fondant, I want to rescue them there rather than on the cake. So then I smooth them out and I take the air bubbles out and I just drop down and just smooth it out. I find it easier to repair any air bubbles. In my classes, I'm really naughty. I roll out the fondant and I make loads of marks, and everyone goes, and then I show them how to smooth it back in. Any mistakes on the fondant before it's on the cake, before it's on the product. The other thing, please don't feel bad about that. I've got about 800 more Ellies, okay? But next time she's not allowed to touch that elephant, okay? So the other thing is I use flexi smoothers. Now you can buy them in the cake stores. They're about $16 for a pack of 2. Or you can go and buy 2 flexi chopping boards in IGA or Woolies for $3, and you can make about 40 of them. So they are beautiful and smooth like a baby's bottom, and they're matted on the other side. Who broke me, Ellie? You can hold this. Have a feel. So these are called Flexi Smoothers. They're made by me, but I use a big chopping board. You know the Flexi chopping boards? And they're only about $2.99 in the dollar shops. And you get them in a pack of 2. And I use them to smooth. I use them to use my sharp edges, and they are beautiful. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to touch base on is your tools. When you start this cake decorating journey, it will grow. Like anything, if you do scrapbooking or you do whatever it is, it will grow. So I recommend you get yourself a set of drawers, plastic drawers, put all your tools in. Because the most thing, when I have my students and I meet them at the shops and they go, "Hi, Jackie," and I'm like trying to recollect, and I can't put a name to them, and I go, "What class did you do?" They went, "Oh, it was last year." I went, "Ah, you're Sarah." I was like, I can't remember what I did yesterday, but it all comes in. But I always say, "Have you done more cakes since the class?" They go, "No." I go, "Why? Why haven't you done them?" "Oh, it's so much to organise." So my tips are, put all your tools together, get yourself a couple of, go to Coles when they're all half price and get some bigger ones. Put all your tools together. If you have everything together, you'll attempt it easier. If it's everywhere, all around the house, you're going, "Oh, not worth it," The other thing I really encourage everyone is that naughty word, but it's a very important word, is patience, We're very, I think as adults, we kind of think we should pick it up just like that. And it's not. Practice doesn't make perfect. The practice makes a progression. Recently, a couple of years ago, my son was learning to drive. He thought he'd have a couple of lessons and bang, do his test. 40 lessons later, then he passed his test. And then we sold our cars and, So, but the point is, you need to give yourself time, etc. So I want to talk to you about roll icing, and some of the flyers had different information. We want to talk about trends as well. But I want to talk to you about roll icing. So I've got a nice little, it's a little bit old, it's a butterfly cookie, and it's got a nice little bit of roll icing decorative on it. Here I've got a plain cookie, and I've covered it with fondant, and I've allowed it to dry. Now, when I make my cookies, I actually use double spacers taped together, so I get 2 sets, and I tape them together with masking tape. I don't use sellotape because it would drive me nuts trying to undo it all. So I tape 2 sets together, and then I put another set together, and then I roll out my cookie dough with a piece of baking paper, and then all my beautiful cookies are all uniform in thickness. Now the downside of that is my husband and son is not happy because there's no offcuts to scoff because they are all perfectly rolled out. But what's lovely is everything is uniform, so it looks more professional. I don't like that word professional because some people go, "Oh, you're professional." I am trained, but I think they look neat and, but I don't like the word professional as such. So what's awesome using the spacers also, you'll know roughly how many cookies you'll make out of each batch because they will all be the same thickness. And what's so lovely is they will all bake the same. So if they're different thicknesses, they will cook differently. Okay, does that make sense? But if they're all the uniform thickness, they will be beautiful. Okay, now, there are all different recipes for roll icing. Now, I do roll icing classes, and I made a bit of a stir a couple of years ago, last year actually, and I did a live video on my Facebook page. And for those that haven't visited my Facebook page, please visit it. It's Contemporary Cakes and Classes. And please like me if you want to. So what I did was I did a bit of a controversy thing, and I started piping, and I set up my camera and I started piping, and I've had over 15,000 views, and I've had a few little spammers, but what I was doing, I was piping, and then after about 5 minutes I was showing how I pipe, how I angle it, everything, and then I said, "So guys, what am I using?" And then all the comments came up, roll icing. But I didn't use roll icing. I used, are you ready for it? Hold on to your seats. Toothpaste. Not stripy stuff, but toothpaste. Okay, and you're going to go, "What? Toothpaste?" It was all on practice sheets, okay, and not for the customers. I charged extra for toothpaste, okay. So you might go, why toothpaste? So back in England, I trained at Highbury College in Portsmouth, and we used mashed potato for piping our beautiful rosettes. It tasted revolting. It was cold. And at the end of the session, we had to tub it all back in because we had like metal tins to practice on. And we'd pop it back in tubs and then pop it back in the fridge. And then there used to be assistants that would take everything out so it wasn't cold. But we would use mashed potato to pipe rosettes to do all our piping. And you might go, why would you use mashed potato? Because the heat of our hands and an inexperienced handler can overhandle the bag and everything just goes sloppy. So for the first 3 weeks in our pastry classes, I come home and Mum goes, what did you do today, man? I practiced with mashed potato. She goes, what? What sort of college are you at, you know? But we practiced with mashed potato. And then we learned how to get the techniques, and then obviously we used proper frosting, buttercream and stuff. And years ago, I went to a demo, and the lady said the easiest thing to practice, because many people don't want to practice, they can't be bothered to make raw icing and then practice. So I used toothpaste, just cheap toothpaste with no stripes on. I cut the end off, so I don't squeeze it. I cut it out the thick end, and I just squeeze it into I was going to bring it in here, but you might have heckled me, so I didn't. And you can just squeeze it all into a container. And what's lovely is it doesn't create a skin, so you can keep reusing it and keep reusing it. And you might go, blimey, this woman talking about toothpaste. But the whole purpose for it is to learn how to pipe. I had a couple of people saying, you know, oh, that's not the same consistency. It is, because what I do is if it's too loose, and the cheaper brands are loose, the better quality ones are thicker, but you can add a little bit of icing sugar, and then that opened up another can of worms, because all the comments were, well, then why aren't you using raw icing? And I'm saying, but the point is, I'm just trying to explain that you can practice, because if you don't want to make raw icing up, but you actually want to start practicing on how to do your drops, your connections, your shapes and stuff, then use a tub of toothpaste, but not on your cakes, okay? So anyway, I'm that crazy woman that probably went on a few things. And so anyway, Cake Ornament, which is a local store here in Slacks Creek, produces wonderful product. It's called raw icing. And basically what it is the combo of egg albumin, so egg white, food acid, which is our lemon juice, and it's a combo mixed together. It comes out about $6 a packet, but that is enough for about 100 plus cookies for me to make. Now, you might go, why does she want to use a packet mix and not make her own? When we do our raw icing classes, we make our own. But the downside is there's no risk of salmonella. There's no raw egg white in there. So if you're using that, and that's another thing you must be aware of, our eggs must be salmonella free. They have, even if they're free range, they have to be, you know, make sure that they're salmonella free. The only way around that is the frozen egg whites, which are pasteurized. So this is a wonderful, wonderful product. Many people, I've got a buttercream class this afternoon, and many people when they make raw icing or make icing, they use icing mixture, but that's got to cut of corn flour and icing sugar together. It's not the right product. And even when I make my beautiful buttercream, I don't use icing mixture. And often people go and buy it, because when you buy a bag of raw icing, you could kill somebody with it. It's like rock hard, and but everyone goes to the icing mixture. But icing mixture is cut with corn flour, and that's why you get a grainy, horrible, you're going to go, don't say that about my buttercream, but you get a real sort of pasty, pappy taste. So this afternoon I've got a class happening, and we're going to make proper buttercream with icing. So this is finely sifted, and what I'm going to do is I need a tiny, tiny amount, and I'm going to cover this cookie. Now this cookie I covered with fondant yesterday, so it's nice and dry. So the downside of using any stencils on our cakes or our products, the icing must be dry, okay? Now, another thing is, people aren't aware that if you wanted to, you could use a stencil to emboss, and then you can use, we have pearl colours, I didn't bring them with me, they're powders, and what you can do, whilst your actual icing is still soft, you can push your stencil on top, you can get a fluffy brush and get your beautiful satin pearls and then brush it, and you can get a nice pattern just with your stencil, with just using a brush colour, a powder colour. Does that make sense? So you can use stencils not just for putting royal icing on, you can actually use them with your edible pearl colours. I say pearl colours because they're really pretty. They pick up the colours, you know. A couple of years ago, I had a lady that ordered 20 cookies, and then within 2 days, the order went up to 100. And they were train cookies. And so what I did was I got my train stencil, and I got all my dry powders, and I did the blue for the bottom bit, and I did it really, really quickly, and it was so much quicker than mixing different colours for icing. So I've got some really small containers. I've got some water that I've not drunk yet. I've got vodka here. Cheers. Yamas, if you're in Greece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a teeny, teeny little bit of water in there. And when you put your water in your container, you're going to take it back out. So you're probably going to put about half a teaspoon, and you'll be amazed how far this stuff goes. So basically this is raw icing. This is icing sugar. It's got dried egg white, and it's got acetic acid, which is the lemon juice. Now, with our raw icing, I don't know if you're aware, but you can actually flavour this. You can buy strawberry oils and add flavour to it. You can add peppermint oil and flavour to it. The other thing which I haven't spoken about is you can also add flavours to your fondant. So you can use oil flavours, edible oil. A few years ago, I had a crazy student that used the oils that you put in candles. And she said it tastes revolting. And I said, why? What have you done? She said, I put a really nice strawberry oil in the fondant. And I said, what do you mean? She said, oh, it tastes really horrible. And I said, can you look at the bottle? And it wasn't edible oil. It was oil that you put in a candle thing. So you can colour up your fondant orange, and you can put orange oil to it. You can colour up your fondant pink and put strawberry oil to it. You can colour up your fondant yellow or lemon and add lemon flavour to it. So a couple of years ago, I did a massive cupcake tower, and all the cupcakes matched the colour. So I did green and then peppermint, pink, strawberry, lemon, yellow. Can you see? So you can add flavours, but it must be edible oil. Okay? Repeat after me, edible oil. Edible oil. I know. So I'm just going to add a smidgen, a little bit. Now, another thing is, everyone says, oh, when I do cake decorating, I'm really messy. Trust me, I am the messiest chef ever. But I have shares in these black trays. I get these from Office Works. They're about $5 a pop. If you go into Kmart, they're about $2, and they're beautiful colours. But my husband said, I can't have any until I get rid of those, and I've got about 30. So every other day I try and drop one, but they don't break. But what's awesome is when I'm ganaching, and ganaching is a really, really, really messy thing, all my ganache knives, everything goes on that tray. So at the end, when I'm done, I take that tray to the sink, and holy Moses, it looks like, clean, you know? Because sometimes when I speak to my students, they go, oh, it gets messy. And I go, but don't let that stop you, you know? Is this coming up on that big screen up there? Oh, hello. Okay, so now, what consistency does my raw icing need to be like? Toothpaste. It should be able to hold itself on the knife. Does that make sense? Now, I've got a smidgen here, but this is probably enough to do about 8 cookies alone, okay? Now, it's important that when you use raw icing, everything is grease-free. These containers are grease-free because you don't want any grease, because that grease will react into the egg whites. So, can you see? I've got a really small amount here, but it's like toothpaste. Okay? Now, if you found that this was way too hard, what you would do is simply just dip your knife, give it a shake, and you're going, there's nothing happening, but do you see that little shake? Say yes. But that's all you need, because what happens is it's so easy to keep chasing your tail, going round and round by adding too much water, then more powder, too much water, then too much powder. How do I know? Because I've chased my tail many, many times. And I call it chasing my tail when I'm just really not really getting on, you know. So with our icing, with our icing, we can also add colour to it. Now, when we add colour to it, we need to make sure that we don't add our liquid colours. So none of our rainbows, none of our cochineals, we only want to add a pastel colour. The other thing that's really, really quite important is that when we make our cookies, when we apply our stencils, the product is beautiful and flat. So that's why using those rolling with the spacers, the cookie dough becomes really flat. When I roll it out with my spacers of fondant, the fondant is really flat. Because if it's slightly domed or slightly contoured, yes. So I make piping gel. So piping gel, if you want to write this down. So I make my own. Trust me, there are things I buy, but there's things I make. So piping gel, if you use 1 cup of water, and I normally put about 1 teaspoon of sugar in it. And then I get some corn flour. And what I do is before I heat it all up, but I take about, I normally use about half a tablespoon of corn flour, and I take a little bit of the water from the cup of water and I make it into a little bit of a paste, okay? Because you should never add corn flour powder to a liquid because it'll just all go lumpy. So I make it into like a little paste. Maybe you ever make custard, but you make it into a little paste. And then I put it all into a microwave jug. And I pop it in the microwave for about a minute on 50% power to start with. And normally that first minute, nothing really seems to happen, but it is, but it's just, it's not showing itself. I take it out, I look at it, and then I whack it again in for about another minute on 50%, and then I stir it, and it goes really lovely and thick. And then I let it cool. You can freeze it, and what I do is I use ice cubes, and I pour them into ice cubes, and then I freeze them. And then once they're frozen, I take them out, and I put them into another container, but back in the freezer. And if I've only got 6 cookies or whatever I'm doing, I just take that many cubes out to use as piping gel. Piping gel is a really, really wonderful product. You can add it, you can add colour to it. I could talk all day about piping gel. So if I want to do a water effect, or water, because I'm from London, water, I can add blue pastel colour, and if I wanted to, I could make a cake, and I could do a fishing scene with a little boat, and I can put all my blue piping gel on top to make a water effect. A couple of years I did a really nice cake, was it Training the Dragon? And I did a big waterfall with all these fish coming out, and I mixed blue and white piping gel, and I made it as a water effect. You can also pipe with it. Hence its name, piping gel. The downside of piping, though, it doesn't dry thoroughly. You can also add silver and gold powder to it, because if I wanted to add silver or gold to this, it would never happen because it would disperse into it. You can't. But if I wanted to do a white stencil on this, let it dry, I could then mix alcohol and gold and then paint it. But if you wanted to, you could use piping gel and you can add your silvers and golds, and then you can have that effect and it won't disperse. So piping gel's a wonderful, wonderful product, but you must refrigerate it because it will go mouldy. Now, the downside is it will go mouldy, whereas if you buy the commercial brand at $40 a tin, it will last about a year. But I like to make my own because I want to know what's in it, because sometimes I have people that they're gluten-free or gluten-free, is it? I call them gluten-free. But so I like to know what I'm making, really. So you can make all your own piping gel. I put a bit of sugar in it just to make it a bit sweeter. It shouldn't be cloudy. It should come out clear. And I do it on 50% because it's quite dangerous on doing it on high because it can burn, because it becomes sticky and thick and hot stuff will stick, you know. And then you obviously need to refrigerate it as well. Any more questions about how I do my cookies? Yes. Yes, it will. Yeah, it will. It will fade naturally anyway. And some brands are worse than others. Purple, a couple of years ago, back in Millennium, I won't sing a Robbie Williams song, but back in 2000, back in the UK, I had 9 corporate New Year's Eve cakes going out, all purple. Purple's terrible. It's notoriously known for fading, and it's also notoriously known for speckling. So what happens is colour bits pop out. I'm just going to cover this raw icing, otherwise it'll crust. So purple is notoriously known for losing its colour. So I did all these cakes, and they were all going out on the day of New Year's Eve, and half of them were all fading. So then I had to get my airbrush out, pump some purple colour in, and spray them. Wilton has now brought a brand out that doesn't fade, but some colours will fade, and that's the downside. So I always say test the colours. That's why it's important to use a better product brand than a cheap one. And then you make a cake, and then the next day you open the lid, it's like, oh, where's all the colour gone? You know? So, okay. So what I'm going to do is I've got a nice little chandelier stencil. I'm going to just lay it flat. I don't know if they can home in. With our stencils, when we wash them and dry them, we should pat them dry in between a tea towel and let them dry. We should always allow them to dry flat. So I always allow them to dry flat on a tea towel, because once they have a kink in them, they're a bit of a pain to use. If you have a kink in them, buy a couple of my books and put them between it, and that'll flatten them down. It works perfect. So this has not got really, it's got a slight natural curl, but that's just the thing of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the angled part of my knife, and I'm going to use the underside part of my knife. So this is an unusual tool. So when we use it for ganashing, we use it for releasing, but we use the underside. We don't use the top. So I'm going to scoop a small amount. I'm going to lay it still. I'm going to put my glasses on. Where are they? Ha! I can't see. Welcome, everyone. Hello. Hello. How long have you been here? So just a small amount, okay? I'm going to hold it really still, and I'm just going to scoop it on, and I'm going to scrape it off. Now, if I move, not me, but if my stencil moves, everything else is going to move. And then I'm just going to take some of that excess off. Oh, I've just smudged it. Oh, it doesn't look too bad. Don't put your glasses on when you look at this, okay? Okay. So now I have a stencil. Now, I don't want any blobby bits. So the most important thing is to get that icing really nice and shaped. But my critique eye wants to rectify it. So artist brushes. You will need them at some point. Not necessary for arty painting, but for cake decorating. I recommend these. These are made by a company called Royal, and they're plastic coated, and you can purchase them in Spotlight. What's wonderful about them is when you leave them in the sink, they won't split and crack like wood will. They'll last you for a really long time. I also use them for modelling. Not catwalk modelling, but modelling when I want to make eyes and stuff, because they're plastic, okay? You can also use artists or water brushes, and these are a great thing to use, but you must make sure that you regularly empty them, okay? And all they do is basically you just unpop them, unscrew them, and they've just got a barrel. You squeeze it, and you pop your water in. I'm not going to put any vodka in this. You push it in and squeeze it, and it takes all the water up. So this is a really good thing if you're putting lots of little attachments to your cake, so you're not having to keep dipping your water into it, okay? Now, if I wanted to, and if I wasn't happy, I'm going to get a tiny little bit of water, and when I've taken it on, I'm taking it off. I'm just going to rest my hand. Okay, we're not going to enter this in for the echo, okay? So can I get you to have a look? My lovely elephant lady, please don't touch it. So can you see how little that I used? And realistically, raw icing goes a long way. So if I want to wash this now, I would simply just dip it into warm soapy suds, and just give that a wipe. So the downside is, if I'm doing lots and lots of cookies, I have about 4 of these, because I have to wash them and clean them in between use every time. Does that make sense? Yeah. So because you can't keep using the same one, so you have to clean it up, and then I have a clean tea towel, and I have a little production line. I actually, a couple of years ago, went to America, and I bought Martha Stewart. She's got a stenciling It's on my to-do list, and every time I see my electrician, I forget to ask him. But it's a stencil, and it's a stencil hot wire, and you can buy the stencils, the product, and make your own stencils. So you can print off a name or a pattern, and then you can cut it out and heat it out and cut it all out. But I figure I'll do that when I retire. Yes. Yes, you can. Yeah. So let me show you. Here's one I prepared earlier. So this is a styrofoam covered cake. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use some masking tape just to temporarily hold it in. So all the cakes you see in front of you are all fake cakes. However, all the cupcakes are edible. These are the 12 designs. I'm counting now, there are 12. These are the 12 cake designs that's in book 2 that's coming out next week. All those designs are clients' cakes that I've made, whose wedding cakes I've made. So, book 1 is the same. Book 1 has all my beautiful designs in it, but it's a mixed book. It's got wedding cakes, it's got cupcakes. But book 2, I really wanted to specialise on kids' party cakes. And then book 3, which will be out in November, I procrastinate, and I'm like a British bus. I wait for 1 and then 5 turn up, you know. So I procrastinated, but I've been busy doing other things. And so I've written romantic cake designs as well. And all the kids' cakes, all their parents' wedding cakes are in that book as well. So it's kind of a nice little personal. So what I've done is I've used some masking tape and doubled it up. The other thing that I use is piping gel, because that sucks like super glue. So I use piping gel sometimes, and I'm just going to pop that, hopefully, I'm going to find my centre, and I'm going to pop that in there. So here, I've got a really nice wraparound stencil, okay? Now with stencils, you can choose which way you want to have them. Sometimes I have students that get excited and they'll go to a scrapbooking show and they'll go and buy loads and loads of stencils and they'll bring them back and go, what do you reckon? I went, oh, the gaps are too big. So when you think about using a stencil, and you can use it on a cupcake, you can use it on a disc, you can use it on a plaque, you can use it on anything, but you have to think about the gaps between, because if there's really big gaps, and she bought like a big parrot and it had all these big gaps for the feather, I said, when you bend that round, because you can't, as soon as you start to bend it, you'll notice things start to pop out. And what I do sometimes, I'll actually get some masking tape. I am that woman. I'll get some masking tape and sometimes just cut it up in some small pieces just to try and hold the gaps so that they don't pull out. So I do it like that. And I might lose that bit, but then I'll go back in with a piping bag and fill it in, because sometimes I had a really lovely stencil that a lady came. I felt really bad. She got it, and I said, yeah, it looks great. She showed me it. I said, yeah, order it. And when it came, it was huge. It was too big. But I spent about another 3 hours piping. But it looked lovely, but the gaps were too much on it, you know. So again, with our stencils, if you wanted to have this as a bottom design, that's going to be a pain because of the board. But sometimes all my cakes have boards anyway, and then I have a very narrow turntable. So if I wanted to, I could bring that right down to the bottom to make a bottom pattern. Does that make sense? But once it's on a board, I really can't do that because the board hinders the stencil. So I'm just going to show you a top pattern. Now, what I normally do is I get some baking paper and I'll extend it so it goes all the way around, because clearly that's not going to go around the whole thing, okay? And what I normally do is I try and mark it so that I have any gaps or mistakes at the back. Okay, so I do make mistakes, but hopefully not that many. So when you have a stencil, you need to work out how many repetitions is it going to do. So for this, I'm going to just line it up on here, and I'm going to use masking tape. Now, before you have horror and go, Jackie, masking tape is not edible, what I normally use is I use medical tape, because I kind of figure out if Logan Hospital can use it on all my cuts when I go, then I use medical tape to attach my stencils. But normally what I do is I extend it with some baking paper, So then I attach it all the way around. Does that make sense? The baking paper holds it on. But I'm going to use some masking tape. Use it on all my cake tins. So when I'm baking all my cakes at the weekend, it won't melt. I can put the name of the lady's cake on it. If it's gluten-free, I know it's gluten-free, because A, it doesn't want to rise very much. But I use masking tape because it doesn't melt. I might need an assistant here. Can I get you to come here? And what's your lovely name? Jesslyn. Welcome, Jesslyn. Can I get you to put your beautiful fingers and just hold that there for me? Okay. See? We have live assistance. I still want you to hold on to it for dear life, okay? Now, I'm going to use a clean knife because my knife has yucked up a bit. And I just want to make sure I haven't got too much dried bits on here. And again, what I'm going to do, I'm only going to do half the cake. And again, I don't want too much on there. You all good? Can I get you to use your hands and hold that as well? Now, are you smiling at the audience as well? See, we can multitask. So what I'm doing first of all, I'm using my knife like butter, and I'm just doing like a thin coat. Now, normally I would do it so I'm facing it, but because I want my beautiful audience, and you are all quite beautiful, by the way, I just want you to see how I'm doing that. Now, when we stencil, we want to get a really nice even coating, okay? Just like when you put your toothpaste on your toothbrush. I'm not doing all the way around. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a flexi smoother. Now, I can use one of my own flexi smoothers, but they're too flexy. So what I'm going to use is a bowl scraper or a cleaner, okay? And then what I'm going to do is just start from there and do one continuous scrape. Was that an aha moment then? Okay, and just one more. Now, my stencil is slightly protruding on there, but that's okay. Now, I'm going to get you to release your beautiful hand, and by magic, we are going to release it. And so I got a bit of a bulge, but don't tell the husband, okay? I got a bit of a bulge. So what I'm going to do, thank you very much. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a little bit of a wet brush again. And I'm just going to rest my beautiful fingers. And you know what? Woohoo! +2s are lovely. So what I want to do, I want to rest my hand. So I want to just tidy up those beautiful little bumps and just blend them. But can you see how quick and effective that is? Okay, and then what I would do is I'd leave that to totally dry. And then once that's totally dry, I would obviously want to clean this up, and then I'm going to repeat the pattern. Now, sometimes what I do is I'll actually blank some sections out with the paper, and so that it doesn't, because sometimes that pattern will overlap in one section, and I don't want that stencil to do a double layer. But can you see just how pretty that looks? Yeah. So what's on trend at the moment? So next week I've got some really awesome cakes going out. I've got unicorn cakes. Who loves them? I love them. One of my friends said, "Oh, I don't like them. Do you think they'll be in for long?" I went, "Yeah, they'll be in forever." Because I think unicorn cakes, now you can get them as Halloween. You can get them for Valentine's Day. You can get llama ones. Have you seen the llama ones? So I love my unicorn cakes. And then so what I've done on here, and this is all fondant, and I've painted with edible, and then this is a bit of buttercream. And then what I've done is I've done matching cupcakes. So in this book, I've done matching cupcakes with all the designs. But on trend at the moment is the unicorn. And now what's on trend is the little fat unicorn. Have you seen it? Where she's eaten half the cake and she's laying there with a big tummy and she's got all cake over her face. I want to come back as that unicorn, you know? And so next week, it's the week after next. Next week I've got no cakes. We've got a big cake show. But the week after, I've got a beautiful buttercream swirly cake with a big wedge of cake that's cut out. I don't know what I'll do with that cake, by the way. But I'm going to cut a big wedge of cake out and then pipe some more buttercream so it doesn't go dry. And I'm going to model a little fat unicorn that's laying there with a belly and all the stuff around her mouth. So I think that on trend, you know, for kids' cakes, I think if you can visualize it, you can make it. What's still on trend is geode cakes, which is like the crystal cakes. I don't know if you've seen them. Every time someone rings up for one, I'm always away. I'm overseas. I can't do that. I don't like geode cakes personally myself, but they're like all crystals, and you know. And then when I tell the client how much they're going to be, they go, "Oh no, I'll have an easier cake." So what's on trend at the minute? Lots of metallics still, lots of metallics, and lots of florally wedding cakes. You know, what's very on trend at the minute is the abstract designs as well. So a lot of the cakes are matching the catwalk of the bridal gowns and stuff. So that's very on trend for wedding cakes at the minute. And at the end of the day, also what's on trend really is what the kids are watching on TV and those programs. I've done a ninja cake, but apparently it's a Ninjago. But for copyright reasons, it's an Australian ninja. Yes. So, and what I love making is my little princess tiara. So that tiara I've actually made. This is made out of dried fondant with the tylose, and I've made this out of my own cutters. I've made a triangle of paper, and then I've cut the shapes, and then I've cut out the hearts, and I've let it dry, and I've let it dry on a round styrofoam, or I use a cake tin, and I put a couple of really good books either side to stop the cake tin from moving, and I allow it to dry like that, for that shape. And then afterwards, whilst it's still wet, I use a very technical tool, it's called the end of my brush, and I indent and put the pearls in. And then I've done a little bit of piping on there. So what I also love is the ice cream cone cake, and I made that for one of my clients' daughters. She loves SeaWorld. And what's really interesting, in those wafer cakes, the actual cones, I actually put cake mixture inside. So this is a fake cake, but when I made it, I actually put some of my recipe mixture in the cones, so that at the end, when all the cake was scoffed, I said to the mum and dad, I said, by the way, after you've cleared up the wild party for the 2-year-old, I said, the actual ice cream cones have got cake in. And Nathan's like, no way. I went, yes, you know. Because so what I did was I actually put the raw mixture in the wafer cones and then put them in the oven and baked them. And I still put the swirls, you know. So I think it's amazing what we can do with fondant, and whether it's a small cupcake to start that journey off, or whether it's a big cake. But my biggest tip is just plan it, you know, see what can be done ahead. Mum always said to me, Jack, Rome was not built in a day, and nor are your cakes, you know, because as a chef, I do everything last minute, because I have to do everything last minute to make it look beautiful. But with wedding cakes and stuff, I had to really think about how I can make my cakes, and it's like, you know, often people are time short. So the question is, you know, can you make your little plaques? You can come up and feel these are starting to firm up now. But can you make things in advance? Can you make the cake and put it in the freezer? Can you colour up the fondant a few days before? Can you make your little decorations and put them in a container? Because at the end of the day, you're never looking at the clock going, oh, I've got 4 hours to kill. It's like, holy Moses, I've got 4 hours to get this done. So it's a different times, you know. So have we any questions? Have any more questions? Yes.
When you make the figures,
yes.
And if something doesn't work like the outside,
Yes. So it's very hard to attach dry fondant on dry fondant. So my go-to thing is what I call my blue tack. So you know, like when we put our kids' posters up or big posters up, we use blue tack or white tack. You know, it comes in packets and get it in Officeworks. I think of fondant as the same. So if I try and put water on water or water on water, But as I'm London, I just say water, because there's no t in water. Yeah, water. Harry. So what I do is I get a tiny little bit of fondant and I add a little bit of water to it to make it tacky. And if I have a dry surface and the arm has come off and there's no damage to that arm, I'll get a tiny, tiny little bit of wet fondant and put it onto the body and then put the arm onto it. And I use it like white tack. So I use this all the time. And what you probably don't know is you can actually pipe with fondant. You go, no, Jack, we're going to pipe with toothpaste now. But you can pipe with fondant. You can only pipe up to about a number 3 tip. So in our piping tips, we have a 0. We don't. We have triple zeros. We have 0, 0.5, all the way up to about 7. We normally pipe an inscription with 3, and 3 is a certain size hole. Any bigger, the writing looks too big. If it's 2, it looks too small. But what you can do, you can mix this with some water and you can make it into royal icing consistency, and then you can pipe with it. It has no stretch, so it has no elasticity, so it will break. It's not great. But if you wanted to pipe quickly some pearls onto a cake and you had no royal icing, you can literally, let me show you, you can literally add some water to this and make it in a consistency. Now, years ago, when we used to not use ribbons on cakes, we used to make this and put it into a paper piping bag and put it between the joins to seal the cake so there was no gaps. So like, you can see there's a gap here, but that's because it's styrofoam. But what you do, you mix the same colour as the fondant. I don't know if the camera can pick up on here, but can you see that's becoming a consistency of toothpaste? No, royal icing. So now, I'm going to lift this up in a minute. So you can actually pipe with royal icing. You can't, fondant, you can't pipe swirls or rosettes because it's just not strong enough to do that. So if I mix it, can you see? I can make it as a royal icing consistency. And so what we do, we put it in a piping bag, and then I can pipe and seal up any joins. If I have any nooks and crannies and I've made a technical dent or a mark, obviously my cakes are perfect. But if I did, I normally just get a little bit of the same colour fondant, wet it with a little bit of water, and then smooth it on and then take it off. It's just like plastering, you know? So can you see? I've made it. So you can make it as a piping consistency, but that's not its purpose, you know? So, is there any more questions? This weekend. Woohoo! Well, I'm going to be there at the stand. My gorgeous husband's going to be at the stand. I think we've got a picture of him coming up in a minute. Is this a PowerPoint presentation thing? No? We've got a gorgeous husband coming up in a minute. I don't know if is it moving? Oh, it's a slow one. He's going to kill me when I put it up there. So these are all our kids at the library. That's my lovely neighbour Jeanette. That's her little girl. She's 14 now. So I do lots and lots here at the library, but these are my classes here in Daisy Hill. We do chocolate panel work. We do some really great baking as well, so I do classes on baking. But I thought I'd snuck in some of my husband's photographs, but I think it might be on the first slider. So it's amazing. So that's my studio. It's not a bad spot. My boss is okay. She's all right, you know. Secret Santa's disappointing. I always know what it's going to be. I can't phone in sick. She kicks me out of bed. So that was awesome. That was a Vegemite cake. That was a stack of toast. That was cake. The plate was sugar. The knife and fork was sugar. And that was a surprise Halloween wedding cake. Yeah. That would be a surprise, opening that up, wouldn't it? But they had a Gothic wedding, so it's funny because oh, there he is. Look, my husband creates too. Look, Master Chef. So we went down to Savour Cooking School, awesome place down in Melbourne, and he is my Master Chef go-to for cottage pies. Yeah. So there he is. Move him on, but no. So. I love reading some of the comments because some people said, oh, I don't know if you should go. It looks a bit basic, the demo. It's like, I do make lovely cakes, you know. So So just to recap, we are based in beautiful Daisy Hill. I have got a clipboard, and if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, I'm going to get you to write your name and your email down. There's lots of papers. So if you want to do that, if you don't, pass it along. My book is available to purchase. We do have FPass. It is $69, and we'll sign it for you if you want to have a look at that. I encourage you to come to the Cake Expo show next week. We truly need our support because our numbers are not as high as they could be. So we really want everyone to come to this show. So you have to buy your ticket online, or you can pay on the day. And the classes all have 20% off if you type the word cakes in at checkout. So I encourage you to go there. We've also got some information about the Cake Association, so if you want to join a group. And if you would like to subscribe to my newsletter. And last but not least, have a lovely day, and thank you for coming. So thank you.